Hello, Epiphany. It's great to see you today. It's Saturday, and I'm glad to continue to read the Gospel of John with you. Here we are, moving through chapter 2. The wedding of Cana was our last exploration. We did that over the past 2 days. And now we're in verse 12. I'll just read it, the short verse. After the wedding in Cana, after this, Jesus went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they remained there for a few days. So this gives us a sense in the Gospel of John who Jesus is traveling with. He's traveling with his brothers, he's traveling with his mother and his disciples. Now it's important to note, and I've taught this before, but I'll say it again, maybe I'll just use this time together to say it, that Jesus was the youngest child in his family. Joseph was a widow. He had children. He was the cousin of Joachim, who was Mary's father. Mary was an only child who was dedicating herself to prayer and service in the temple in Jerusalem. But since Joachim and his wife Anna were old and they had no way of taking care of Mary while she lived in the temple, it was a unique time, incidentally, in that period of time where the high priest was a man from Egypt, and there was some disruption, and women, young girls, along with young boys, were allowed to serve in the temple. That's what Mary was doing. So anyway, she was there serving, but was aging out of the opportunity to stay there with the other boys and girls, and would either then have to give herself to a life of celibacy and service, or leave and get married. Her preference was a life of celibacy and service in the temple, but all of her care had to be given by her family from outside, and her father Joachim and mother Anna couldn't do that. They were getting too old. And so what Joachim did is he arranged to have her marry in celibate partnership with a cousin of his, an older man, a carpenter in Nazareth named Joseph, who already had 4, 5, 6 children, and his wife had died. And so Mary moves up there, adopts those children, and helps Joseph raise them. These are the adult men and women who are traveling with Jesus from Cana back to Capernaum. So now they're there for a few days, and I'll read on verse 13. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, it says he went up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's actually south of Capernaum, but it's up on a hill, right? So people always go up to Jerusalem. No matter what direction they're coming to Jerusalem from, they go up. So, verse 14. In the temple, Jesus found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cord, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he said to those who were selling doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a market." His disciples remembered what was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." I'm going to stop there at the end of verse 17. I want to say a couple of things about this. Oftentimes people believe that this is where Jesus is acting out of anger. But it's important to know there's nothing here that says that Jesus is angry. It says he does make a whip of cord to drive the sheep and the cattle out of the temple. Now Jesus is nothing if not practical and experienced with livestock. The way you move sheep and cattle is with a whip. It doesn't mean you're angry. It means you're effective. Jesus effectively moves them out. And then he pours out the coins of the money changers and overturns their tables. Again, an action of decisiveness, symbolizing what he wants to symbolize, which this isn't a marketplace, this is the house of God, but doesn't necessarily happen in anger. And then he says to those selling doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." Well, it's true. The temple's not a marketplace. It's a place where we worship God. And then the disciples remember Psalm 69, verse 9, zeal for your house will consume me. It's important to know as we read the Bible, when we see these little clips of scripture from the Old Testament that are interjected into the gospel, that these followers of Jesus, Mary included, because she was a great biblical scholar, a very learned woman, they knew the Bible by heart. Their minds weren't clouded with old, Simpson TV show reruns or all the other stuff that we have in life. They studied, learned, thought about, lived into the reality of the Old Testament. And so they would remember things. They would watch Jesus do things and say, that's just like Psalm 69. So we're going to see that over and over again in the Gospel of John. It's very interesting how that link in the memory of the disciples comes up as they're watching what Jesus is doing. So we'll end it there. We'll get, on Monday, we'll start with verse 18 to chapter 2. I hope you have a great weekend. Please join us tomorrow for worship. Go to the YouTube site, type in Epiphany Seattle. The service begins at 8:45, but you can watch it anytime during the day. I'll be talking about the great time out and living in a world that is more about we than it is about me. I'm thinking about we, all of us, together. You're in my prayers. I love you. I miss seeing you on a regular basis. Peace upon your soul.